We are getting into more of these international headlines. Our next one takes us to Latin America, where thousands of demonstrators took to the streets of Venezuela today to protest what they said was an attempt by President Nicolás Maduro to steal the country's disputed election a day after the political opposition and the entrenched incumbent both claimed victory. Fox News senior foreign affairs correspondent Greg Palcott has more.
A showdown in Venezuela as leader Nicolás Maduro was declared the winner of the country's presidential election. The opposition is pushing back, pointing to independent exit polls showing a win by Maduro rival Edmundo González, who also claimed victory.
Our struggle continues, and we won't rest until the will of the people of Venezuela is respected.
The country's election authority, a Maduro ally, did not immediately release detailed vote tallies, claiming a cyber attack slowed the count. The delay prompting calls from the U.S. and several other countries for transparency.
It's critical that every vote is counted fairly and transparently, and that election officials immediately share information with the opposition.
There are also concerns that any instability in oil-rich Venezuela could result in a big price hike at the pump. Secretary of State Antony Blinken expressed concerns the announced results could be at odds with the votes of Venezuelans.
The international community is watching this very closely and will respond accordingly.
Maduro has already served 2 6-year terms that have been marked by an economic collapse, as well as sanctions imposed by the U.S. and the European Union. Millions have fled the country as a result. Some say they thought an opposition win would allow them to return home.
I can only see my family from time to time in video calls. We want the Venezuelan government to fall, to leave.
Nearly 8 million people have left Venezuela since Maduro took office. That's about 1/5 of the country's population. In London, Greg Palcott, Fox News.
Greg, thanks so much. In the meantime, let's bring into the conversation my friend Daniel D Martino, fellow there at the Manhattan Institute and a Venezuelan himself. He joins me. Daniel, thanks for being with us here. I know it's been a busy 24 hours for you kind of getting all of this news in, and it keeps coming in, doesn't it? It's not letting up here. What are you hearing from down on the ground there?
Well, first, I feel really terrible for the dead that have already fallen in Venezuela. Many kids as young as 13 years old who have been killed by the Maduro regime's armed forces. For all the people who have been wounded. I know at least of 5 people who have been killed, many more that have been wounded. And really, there's protests everywhere around the country. There's people who are tearing down statues of the late dictator Hugo Chavez, the leader of the Socialist Revolution. They're being torn down like if this was Vladimir Lenin in the Soviet Union and after 1991. And so it's really a beautiful thing to see, I will say, because the people of Venezuela have woken up and voted in massive numbers against this regime. Not for the first time, but for the first time, I think people understand that they need to be able to defend that victory against them, and the regime is willing to kill in order to stay in power.
Yeah, just some more kind of facts about some of the results, because the exit polls did yesterday show that González was up, and he was up by quite a sizable margin. Officials, though, delayed the release of detailed vote tallies from the election after proclaiming Maduro the winner with 51% of the vote, compared with 44% for retired diplomat Edmundo González. The competing claims, of course, set up a high-stakes standoff. Also, I want to put this up from Juan Ferrero there at the Wall Street Journal, saying Maduro wins the election in Venezuela. Electoral authorities say a result that appears falsified. Polls, exit polls, quick counts show his opponent Edmundo González had actually won, and by a wide margin, 6 more years of the regime. You know, for American consumers of news watching this, for the American electorate, how do you steal an election like Maduro is being accused of here? What evidence can you point to, Daniel, of concrete steps and examples that this is how Maduro does it? This is how he's done it the last 2 times. This is how he did it now the 3rd time to secure another 6-year term here. What have you seen?
Well, they have changed over the last 25 years how they cheat in elections. But I can tell you that the easy explanation of how they cheated in this one is that they just made up the result. It literally was made up. in the Venezuelan election system, thankfully, is paper ballots that are traceable and that are counted by hand. And in each voting center across the country, the citizen witnesses counted by hand the ballots. There is not a single voting center in Venezuela where Nicolás Maduro obtained more than half of the votes. There is not a single voting center in Venezuela where he obtained more than half of the votes that we have publicly seen. And we have publicly seen over 70% of the voting centers reporting. And the opposition has all those ballots at hand. They just published them, by the way, online for everybody to see. You can see your own. If you're a Venezuelan citizen, you can put your national ID number and see all the data. And if you're not a Venezuelan, then you can who voted, then you can just go and check the results by state and even municipality, and even within each municipality with each school and each table. So this result was simply made up, and the regime is really mocking the Venezuelan people in their faces. There are some places of Venezuela, Andrew, and I want everybody to understand, some states of Venezuela where Maduro lost with less than 5% of the vote.
Oh, wow.
Where 95% of Venezuelans in many parts of the country voted against him. In Caracas, actually, which used to be an opposition bastion, is actually the only place where there's a few people left of the regime, because that's where all the regime thugs and their families live. And even there, they got less than 30% of the vote.
So Daniel, from what I understand from our conversations offline, that maybe what is different about this time is the question of publishing the results, the opposition getting their hands on the results so they can look them over themselves. Did that happen?
Yes, that did happen. They do have the evidence, the physical evidence of the election results. And so we know the opposition won. The only question left to do is, what is the opposition going to do about it? Because Maduro is not going to recognize he lost. They're going to blame the United States. They're going to blame the opposition that they're lying. In fact, they just indicted and they want to imprison Maria Corina Machado, who is the leader of the opposition. She was not allowed to run. She's not the candidate. Edmundo González was, but she's effectively the candidate. She is who we support. Edmundo is just a person that was able to be on the ballot, but Maria Corina is the leader. And, you know, she has called for people to be on the streets, and people are defending their ballots, really. The issue is what comes next, and I fear that there's just going to be more bloodshed.
Yeah, so are we already seeing somewhat of a powder keg situation? We were just showing some images from in and around Venezuela from earlier today. They weren't live right now, but is that what we're going to see in the next week? More of the same of that? Or is it going to turn more violent, more restive, you know, deadlier? And have we heard from Maduro yet, Daniel?
Well, we have seen this type of protest before and insurrection in Venezuela. It was seen in 2002, in 2014, 17, and 19. And unfortunately, it always ended in the same result, which is the regime sends their armed paramilitary communist militias in motorcycles with large weapons to kill people so that people go back to their homes and the protests stop and they begin some sort of negotiation process, which never ends in anything. It's a fake dialogue, delay tactic. So I fear that this is what's eventually going to happen, because the only way the Maduro regime is going to be overthrown is if people are willing to really fight them physically and really take over. I mean, like a real revolution, and take over the institutions of government. And that is a very difficult thing because Venezuelans are unarmed. As you can see them in the video, they're throwing rocks. They don't have anything but rocks and trees. And they're fighting against police officers that have been brainwashed for 25 years who have Russian weaponry. How do you beat that? And so it's very difficult. My only hope is that, as I mentioned, there are parts of the country where the opposition won by over 95% of the vote. You can't control over 95% of the population with 0.1% of the population that is armed. Okay. That is a very difficult task.
You know, Daniel, I want to ask you, why was this time so different? I mean, I was following you on social media. The enthusiasm amongst Venezuelans seemed to be at a fever pitch, that we hadn't seen something like this before. during the Maduro regime. What can we attribute that to? Why was this time so different? Why was there so much hope amongst people here in the U.S., elsewhere in Latin America, that Maduro could really go down?
I think there's two reasons. I wouldn't argue it's hope. I would argue it's desperation. This is really our last chance to recover our country. 8 million people have left. That is 25% of our population, of the peak population of Venezuela back in the 2010s. And so a lot of people already know that if the Maduro regime isn't overthrown in the next few months, they're going to leave the country and just, there's not going to be any resistance left, which is why it's also Maduro's last stand. He knows that if he survives this, he will survive forever for the rest of his life. And so the Venezuelan people are desperate on one hand. On the other hand, we have a very different leadership on the opposition now. And I hope that they actually follow through in organizing a true resistance to the regime. But it's different because in the past, the opposition leaders have told people to stand down, to not do whatever it takes in order to free their homeland. And as a result, we have been living under the same government for 25 years, Andrew, my whole life.
Yeah.
I was born a month before Hugo Chavez took office. Yeah. Now his statues are falling apart. I really pray. I pray that Venezuela becomes a free country again, because 8 million people who have left, hundreds of thousands who have been killed. How many people are suffering from starvation? Millions, according to the United Nations, children with malnutrition. Right. So this needs to end quick, because also the economic situation is different. People cannot go many days without working in Venezuela because they will literally starve. So people are desperate.
Yeah, and we know the kind of ancillary effects of the migration issue out of Venezuela into neighboring Colombia, but also to the United States as well. Let's talk about the U.S.'s response. You know, Daniel, you and I both know that the Biden administration had been signaling and open to, and I think they did for a time, ease some of the sanctions pressure on the oil industry there in Venezuela in order to extract some concessions from Maduro about holding a free and fair election. So we didn't see that. Was that futile in hindsight?
It wasn't just futile, it was detrimental to the freedom cause of Venezuela, what the Biden administration did. Biden, and I want to explain to you, the viewers, what he did specifically. He lifted the oil sanctions, which allowed the Maduro regime to obtain more oil revenue, which they used to buy weapons with which they kill the Venezuelan people. They don't use it to buy food. Do not be deceived. And then the worst and perhaps greatest mockery of this supposed effort to bring democracy to Venezuela by the Biden administration is that under the Obama administration, the DEA had captured and arrested and indicted the nephews of Maduro for cocaine trafficking. They brought them to the U.S. Under the Trump administration, they were convicted under a judge for their true charges, and they were sentenced to prison in New York. Biden released the nephews of the dictator. He also released one of the main terrorist financiers of Venezuela and the rest of Latin America, a Colombian Arab man called Alex Saab.
Yes, this was in a prisoner swap, Daniel. Yes,
that's right, in a prisoner swap for regular American civilians. And I understand that the President of the United States wants to rescue Americans who are in Venezuela, but you know what happened after? What happened is that Maduro knows that he can swap prisoners and he can get concessions from the United States if he kidnaps Americans. And so he has kidnapped more Americans since the prisoner swap. And now we need to swap even more people for those people. So instead, what they should have done is kept those people as bargaining chips for the election, not release them pre-election.
You know, Daniel, lastly, though, what about the international pressure? Is it just going to be, you know, tweet condemnations from Javier Milei and Gabriel Boric there in the region itself? Does it stop there, or are you going to see, you know, any second, third tier effects of some of that condemnation or not? I mean, are we going to be speaking in a month or 6 months' time and Maduro might not be there, or is that fanciful?
I don't think that this is what's going to happen. I think simply that, look, very few countries, the reality is that very few countries in the world right now are with the Venezuelan people. Argentina is the main one of those. And I really have to thank from the bottom of my heart President Javier Milei of Argentina, who has stood with the Venezuelan people from the start, who has called out Maduro for who he is, the evil criminal dictator that he is. But the other countries that have supported us, sure, you know, the Dominican Republic and Panama and Costa Rica, small countries, that's okay, that support us, Ecuador. But Maduro decided to break relations with all of those countries tonight. He has told all the ambassadors of about 7 Latin American nations to leave Venezuela, including Argentina. The United States, on the other hand, put out a statement that doesn't even call out the fraud in the election. They can't even call the facts. I'm not saying that they need to advocate for anything or even impose a sanction. Yes, they should. But they can't even say, the Secretary of State of the United States cannot even call a spade a spade. So why? Why are they hiding the truth?
All right, Daniel, we're going to have to leave it at that. We went a little long here, but thanks so much for offering your perspective, your personal story, and what happens next there in Venezuela, Daniel. Thanks so much. Good night.